She had always believed that love was a chapter meant for the young. At 62, Margaret lived alone in her small countryside home. Her days were quiet, predictable, and mostly spent tending to her garden, reading old books and walking along the dirt paths that led to the nearby fields. Friends often told her that she deserved happiness, but she had grown used to the calm solitude of her life. Love, she thought, had passed her by, leaving only memories of youth and fleeting moments that no longer mattered. Margaret's mornings were simple. She would rise with the sun, brew a cup of tea, and sit by the window watching birds flit from tree to tree. Sometimes she would talk to her cat Whiskers, who purred contently on her lap. The quiet suited her. She liked the predictability of her life, the comfort in knowing what each day would bring. But beneath the calm exterior, there was a part of her that longed for something more, something she could not quite name. One chilly autumn morning, as she tended to her marigolds, she noticed a stranger riding along the old country road. He was a tall man, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and dusty boots, and he seemed to carry a presence that was both confident and kind. Margaret watched him from her garden gate as he approached her fence, stopping to admire the flowers she had carefully planted. "Beautiful garden," he said, tipping his hat politely. "You've done a fine job here." Margaret smiled politely. "Thank you," she replied. "I try my best. I'm Jack," he introduced himself. "I'm passing through on my way to the next town. Thought I'd see the countryside while I still can." There was a warmth in his voice, something that made Margaret feel unexpectedly at ease. She found herself chatting with him longer than she intended. Jack had a way of making ordinary conversation feel meaningful. He spoke about his travels, his love for horses, and his appreciation for quiet places like hers. Margaret listened intently, realizing that she had not felt this kind of connection in years. Over the next few days, Jack kept returning to the little path near her home. Sometimes he would wave from a distance, other times he would stop for a brief conversation. Margaret found herself looking forward to these encounters. Each time they met, he shared stories of people he had met, places he had seen, and lessons he had learned along the way. And each time, Margaret felt a flicker of something she thought she had long buried: hope. Despite her cautious nature, Margaret began to enjoy Jack's company. He was respectful and attentive, never pushing boundaries and always leaving her feeling lighter than before. She began to share small pieces of her own life, stories of her youth and memories of her late husband. Jack listened with genuine interest, and sometimes when he laughed at a funny memory, Margaret felt a spark of joy she hadn't known in years. One evening, a sudden autumn storm forced Jack to take shelter near her house. Margaret had been sitting by the fireplace reading when she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found him dripping from the rain, hat in hand and an apologetic smile on his face. "I didn't want to bother you," he said, shaking off the water. "But the storm came faster than I expected." Margaret hesitated. She was used to her solitude and wasn't sure if she should invite him in, but something about the vulnerability in his eyes made her step aside. "Come in," she said softly. "You'll catch a cold out there." Jack entered, shaking water from his coat and hanging it on the rack. Margaret offered him a cup of tea, and he accepted gratefully. They sat by the fire, the warmth spreading through the room as rain pattered against the windows. For hours they talked, not about anything extraordinary, but about ordinary things: the beauty of the changing seasons, the taste of fresh bread from the local bakery, the quiet joy of a simple life. Margaret found herself laughing more than she had in months, feeling a comfort in his presence that she hadn't realized she missed so deeply. As the evening wore on, Margaret noticed how easy it was to be around Jack. There was no pretense, no pressure, only a sense of companionship she hadn't experienced in years. He shared stories of his own losses and triumphs, and she realized that he too had lived a life full of twists and turns. It struck her that perhaps age did not diminish the capacity for new connections. It merely changed the way they unfolded. By the time the storm subsided, it was late. Jack stood to leave, brushing off his coat. "Thank you for your kindness," he said, his voice gentle. "I didn't expect to find such warmth in a stranger's home." Margaret smiled a little shyly. "You're welcome," she replied. "I'm glad you stayed. It was nice having company." "Nice?" Jack asked, raising an eyebrow with a small smile. "I'd call it something more. But I understand. Sometimes one must take things slowly." Margaret nodded, feeling a curious mixture of anticipation and caution. She wasn't used to letting people in, and yet she didn't want him to leave. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the quiet moments by the fire, the sound of rain, and the unexpected laughter they had shared. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a life that might include someone else, not just passing through, but staying if only for a while. The next morning, Margaret woke to the sound of birds chirping and the sun shining through her window. She went about her routine, but something had shifted. There was a lightness in her step, a feeling that perhaps life had more to offer than she had believed. When she looked out the window, she saw Jack riding along the road, tipping his hat in her direction. She waved and he waved back, a simple gesture that carried more meaning than words could express. Over the following weeks, their friendship deepened. Jack would stop by whenever he passed through, and Margaret found herself preparing small treats, looking forward to their conversations, and sharing her favorite spots in the countryside. They discovered a mutual love for quiet walks, homemade meals, and the beauty of simple pleasures. Margaret began to see that companionship could exist at any age, that the heart was capable of opening in ways she had never imagined. One crisp morning, Jack arrived with a small bundle of wildflowers. "For you," he said, handing them to her with a smile. "I thought these might brighten your day." Margaret took the flowers, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "They're beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you. It's nothing," Jack replied. "Just a small gesture. You deserve happiness, Margaret, even if you think you're too old for it." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "I've always believed that love was for the young," she admitted. "But maybe I was wrong." Jack's smile was gentle, understanding. "Perhaps it's never too late," he said simply. And in that moment, Margaret felt something shift within her. She realized that life was not just about the years that had passed, but about the moments that could still be created. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she was excited to find out. As autumn gave way to winter, their bond grew stronger. They shared quiet mornings over tea, long walks through frost-covered fields, and evenings filled with stories and laughter. Margaret began to understand that love was not always about passion or grand gestures. Sometimes it was about presence, understanding, and the comfort of knowing that someone cared. By the time the first snow fell, Margaret had come to cherish Jack's visits. He had become a part of her life in a way she had never anticipated. She realized that while she had once thought herself too old for love, she had been too young to understand its many forms. Love, she now knew, could arrive at any age, in unexpected ways, and with gentle persistence it could warm even the coldest days. Winter had settled over the countryside, covering the fields and trees with a soft blanket of snow. Margaret's small home felt cozier than ever, the fire crackling in the hearth as she prepared tea for herself and Jack. Their friendship had grown stronger with each passing day, built on shared moments, gentle laughter, and the quiet understanding that comes from true companionship. Margaret often found herself smiling at small things now. A word Jack had said, the way he paused to admire a bird in the garden, or even the warmth of his presence when he visited. One snowy morning, Jack arrived with a basket of fresh bread and a thermos of hot cocoa. "I thought we could enjoy a proper winter morning together," he said, brushing snow off his coat. Margaret opened the door and laughed at his enthusiasm. "You always know how to bring a bit of cheer," she said. They carried the basket and thermos inside, setting them on the table near the window. Outside, snowflakes danced in the gentle wind, and inside, the warmth of the room made everything feel comforting and safe. As they sipped cocoa and nibbled on bread, their conversation turned to their pasts. Jack shared memories of his youth, the adventures he had and the challenges he faced. Margaret spoke of her life, of joys and losses, of dreams that had faded and hopes that had never quite materialized. They discovered that despite their different paths, they had both experienced loneliness and the longing for companionship. Sharing these stories brought them even closer, creating a bond rooted in empathy and understanding. Days turned into weeks, and the snowy landscape became a familiar backdrop for their growing friendship. Margaret noticed that she no longer dreaded the quiet hours of the day. Instead, she looked forward to Jack's visits, to the laughter they shared and the simple comfort of someone who cared. She began to realize that age had not dimmed her capacity to feel connected to another person. Rather, it had refined her understanding of what mattered most: trust. kindness, and shared moments of joy. One afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds, Jack suggested they take a walk through the snow-covered fields. Margaret bundled herself in a thick scarf and coat, and they stepped outside, the crisp air filling their lungs. Each step crunched softly in the fresh snow, and the world seemed quiet and still, as if it existed solely for them. They talked about their dreams for the future, not grand ambitions but small hopes, visiting the nearby town together, planting flowers in the spring, and simply enjoying each other's company. Margaret found herself sharing thoughts she had kept private for years, and Jack listened with genuine interest and care. It amazed her how naturally she could speak to him, how effortlessly the words flowed, and how easily her heart felt at peace in his presence. As they walked, Jack paused by a frozen pond, its surface glistening in the afternoon sun. He looked at Margaret with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "sometimes life surprises us in ways we never expect. I never imagined meeting someone like you, someone who makes the ordinary feel extraordinary." Margaret's cheeks flushed slightly, but she smiled. "I didn't expect it either," she admitted. "I always thought love and friendship like this were things I had missed out on." Jack reached out and gently took her hand. "It's never too late," he said softly. "Connections like these, they don't follow rules. They happen when they're meant to." Margaret felt a warmth spread through her, not just from the cold, but from the sincerity in his words. She squeezed his hand, realizing that what they shared went beyond friendship. It was a deep understanding, a companionship built on years of life experience and the willingness to open their hearts again. The days that followed were filled with more shared adventures. They cooked meals together, explored the snowy countryside, and spent long evenings by the fire talking about everything and nothing. Margaret discovered a joy in routine she had never known, preparing meals with someone else, planning small outings, and simply enjoying the presence of another person. Jack, too, seemed to thrive in her company, often remarking on how comfortable and peaceful her home felt. One evening, Margaret invited Jack to help her with a special project. She had always wanted to create a small garden path that would wind through her yard, lined with flowers and small stones. Jack eagerly agreed, and together they worked through the cool twilight, laughing as they carried stones and planted bulbs. Margaret marveled at how much fun it was to share something she had always done alone. The garden path became a symbol of their growing partnership, a testament to the beauty of collaboration and shared dreams. As spring approached, Margaret realized that the bond she had formed with Jack had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She felt more alive, more optimistic, and more willing to embrace the unknown. She began to understand that life was not about the years she had lived, but about the moments she could still experience, the relationships she could nurture, and the joy she could find in unexpected places. One sunny afternoon, as they walked through the fields, Jack stopped and looked at her with a gentle smile. "I have an idea," he said. "Why don't we plan a little trip together? Just a short one to see the countryside beyond this town. It would be our first adventure together." Margaret's eyes lit up. "I'd like that," she said. "It sounds wonderful." They spent the next few days preparing for their journey, packing essentials and mapping out a route that would take them through scenic landscapes and quaint villages. Margaret felt a thrill of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. The idea of traveling with Jack, sharing new experiences and creating memories together, filled her with hope and happiness. The trip turned out to be even more enjoyable than they had imagined. They explored small towns, visited local markets, and met friendly people along the way. Margaret found joy in discovering new places and sharing the experience with someone who appreciated her company so fully. Each day brought laughter, conversation, and moments of quiet reflection, and she realized that love and companionship were not confined to youth. They could be found at any stage of life, in the simplest gestures and shared experiences. When they returned home, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. She began to look at her life with fresh eyes, appreciating the beauty of ordinary days, the comfort of friendship, and the possibility of new beginnings. Jack continued to visit regularly, each time bringing warmth, laughter, and companionship into her life. Margaret's home, once quiet and solitary, now felt alive with shared moments, stories, and the simple joy of being together. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Margaret turned to Jack with a smile. "You've changed my life," she said softly. I never thought I could feel this happy again." Jack reached for her hand, holding it gently. "And you've changed mine," he replied. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Margaret realized that their connection was more than friendship. It was a deep, enduring bond built on trust, respect, and the willingness to embrace life fully. Even later in years, she understood that love did not always arrive with grand gestures or dramatic events. It could be quiet, steady, and profoundly meaningful. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow across the room, Margaret felt a sense of peace she had never known. She looked at Jack and smiled, knowing that the days ahead would be filled with shared experiences, laughter, and companionship. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly alive, grateful for the unexpected joy that had entered her life. Winter gave way to spring, and Margaret's garden bloomed once again, vibrant and full of life. Jack helped her tend the flowers, and together they watched the seasons change, celebrating small victories and moments of happiness. Margaret realized that life, even after 60, could still hold surprises, adventures, and the beauty of connection. In the quiet moments, as they sipped tea by the window or walked hand in hand through the fields, Margaret knew that she had discovered something extraordinary, a companionship that transcended age, a friendship that had grown into love, and a reminder that life's most meaningful moments often come when we least expect them. Margaret had once believed she was too old for love, too set in her routines, too worn by time to experience joy again. But with Jack, she discovered that the heart is resilient, capable of opening at any stage of life. Love in its quiet and enduring form had found her at last, proving that it is never too late to embrace happiness, companionship, and the simple beauty of sharing life with someone who truly cares. And so, Margaret's days, once quiet and solitary, became filled with laughter, stories, and the warmth of a friendship that had blossomed into love. The seasons continued to change. The garden grew more beautiful with each passing year, and Margaret learned that life's greatest joys are often the ones that arrive quietly, patiently, and unexpectedly.